Yeah, it's in line with so many stories. Like, remember when the story came about Seal Island, and and the New York Times had to, and the Washington Post, they had to admit that they were wrong, that it was false reporting. But you know what? Instead of just taking it down and saying this can never happen again, what did they say? They said, well, it may have been an inaccurate story, but it lifted morale.
Yeah, they may have survived. And mind you, they did. When you have Zelensky coming out saying how he's going to posthumously award them all the Ukrainian Medal of Honor,
right?
How bad is your intelligence to not know that this is a bunch of bull,
Or maybe he knew and he just is participating in the propaganda. It's hard to know.
Probably that too.
But there was two major stories like that. And then now we have the poisoning story. And I'm just curious to see how many mainstream media have not gotten the statement saying this isn't true, this is false, and are still going to try to run with it. I mean, that's what's,
And it's really hard, Tara, because I'm sure you've probably seen yourself. I've even seen with my own family. When I talked about the Snake Island story, my family had a very hard time believing it. And I was like, no, you guys, they have surrendered. And they're like, well, surrendered means executed. And it's like, no, who said this? But again, I can't blame them and I can't be angry, because when it's just ingrained in your head for the past 20 years, Russia bad, US good.
Right.
It's hard to, you kind of empathize a little bit. I don't sympathize, but I empathize.
The propaganda is really strong here in the US. And I think when the legacy papers, like I mentioned with the Snake Island story, I actually said Snake Island, when they propagate that on the headline, it's really something. The other thing that was propagated this weekend was peace activists coming out about, the no-fly zone. And I don't think people really understand. I think viewers that are watching us hopefully do. They don't really understand like the ramifications of a no-fly zone, that could mean World War III. And then here we have Joe Biden, who is just, pushing and with his rhetoric and just amping it up. And I think Oz has a quick clip. It's like a few seconds of Joe Biden of what led to this conversation that we're about to have. If you could bring that up for us.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain
in power, right? Mm-hmm. That was the whole clip. So do you want to play it again, Oz, or or is it clipped off? Okay, let's see if it runs. Okay, let's see if it runs. First live stream, everyone. There's going to be a little bit of gremlin,
Deal with it.
Yeah, deal with it. Because we're here.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House immediately clarified that message and says,
there you go. So, Faran, your thoughts when you heard that, when you initially heard that, what was your thought that ran through your head? And I'll tell you mine.
My first thought was, come again? What? Because it kind of solidified, and I think saying the quiet part out loud of the past 30, 40 years of the United States wanting regime changes, and countries that they don't get along with. Since 1960, the United States has been involved in 62 government coups. That should bring that alarm bell should be going off in Americans' heads. However, and the person who told me that was my own father. My dad's kind of more of a quiet, mild-mannered man, and he reads all the time. He's a neurosurgeon and a lawyer. And I will say this: what I've learned to appreciate about him is you have men like Ron Paul, both doctors. You have men like Thomas Massey, the congressman who's been saying we should not be sending money over to Ukraine. We should not be getting involved in Ukraine. And he's getting a lot of blowback in Congress. But you have, and he's an engineer, you have doctors and engineers who are very solutions-based in Congress, who are looking at a lot of this saying, wait, what's the solution? Why isn't this working? I don't understand, and they have to, they're trying to figure this out. And I think with my own father seeing it, where he's like, wait a minute, let's go back. Let's look at the problems and look at the solutions. And like I said, he was the one who told me we've been involved in 62 different coups. since 1960. Why is that? What is the solution to that? Is it that we're trying to spread democracy, but maybe it's not working anymore? The fact that all of our money is trying to go to, instill democracy when every time we try it doesn't work. And I think, again, this was Biden saying the quiet part out loud. Granted, he walked it back, or at least, I compared it this morning on Fault Lines where I said, I compare it to a curling game where, for those that don't know curling, it's where you throw this giant weighted thing down the ice. Biden is that giant weight down the ice. And, behind it, you have all these people sweeping up behind it. And that's his press people trying to, clean up after him. Or there should be just a permanent Roomba installed behind him to clean up the mess that he makes right behind him.
Speaking of Roombas, here we have Anthony Blinken. So let's bring up that clip. The human version. Here you go.
Human version of the Roomba.
That the State Department clarify Biden's comment in yesterday's speech.
Well, I think we heard from the president that this is precisely what he thinks. Normally you hear these comments in the Situation Room with the White House. He said something out loud. And I think, notwithstanding, the attempt to clarify that this doesn't mean the United States is changing its approach to Russia in terms of trying to assertively try to push Putin from office. I do think that the president's comments about being a war criminal, as well as saying that Russia, merits a better leader, will have a longer-term impact in terms of say sanctions, for example. And it's going to be very difficult to take steps in the future that relieve pressure on someone like Putin, given what he's done.
So Farron, what are your thoughts on Blinken trying to walk it back, but then Biden doubling down and then not walking it back, which came later? What are your thoughts on this back and forth and kind of word salads coming from the White House, but then Joe Biden saying, well, I'm not going to walk it back, and then trying to excuse it that he's, that he had a human reaction or something.
Well, and I don't know if you saw, they had the actual they had the zoomed in version of the notes that he brought out to the press conference immediately after. And it showed, in like size 17 font, which goes to show this guy is really old. But it said, NATO is the strongest it's ever been. I responded with emotion. And I kid you not, Tara, at the very top, it said, tough questions, Putin Q&A. And it was just like, and they had the questions out. They had the bullet points on it. It made Trump's Sharpie notes look like they were actual biblical text at this point. It was so just juvenile. And then the fact that he you see where he looks down and he says it word for word in the press conference, I responded at an emotional state. And you're just like, this is the leader of the free world. And when you have Biden and even Anthony Blinken, Biden saying, we're going to respond in kind if there's a chemical attack. Immediately, Jake Sullivan's like, no. We will never respond in kind with the chemical attack.
Right.
And which makes me think, and this is where you would know better than I would, is this really Joe Biden being a senile, old, crotchety grandpa that, doesn't know what he's doing? Or is it that he kind of knows what he's doing, but, it's that part.
That's an interesting point, because I think that there's been a couple of things he's dropped on purpose, and that's just my opinion. Do I think he's a lightweight? That's what he was called back in the day when I was there. He's a lightweight. He's not really interested in studying the legislation or stuff. He has other people telling him what he's supposed to think and do, or at least even when he was younger and more vital. I do remember,
as we see in these cue cards, they tell him what to say.
Yeah. And I remember the press secretary being very frustrated when he would do live television, because he would never do what they asked him to do, and he would swear accidentally. And back then, it was a very big deal for FCC. They would get fined. It was a very big deal. And
$125,000 swear word, at least in today's day and age. I know we're being in TV. So yeah, it's very expensive.
Yeah. So it seems like it's relaxed on formats like this, but like, you know, for, you know, a major news thing, it was a big deal. But yeah, I would say from back in the day when I was there, it was obviously before Vladimir Putin came to power. It was in the 90s. He was in the background. So he wasn't on the geopolitical scene, and the Soviet Union had just collapsed. And it was kind of being just, you know, American business people were just helping themselves, so to speak. And so some of these oligarch experts that you see that have all this against Vladimir Putin were the ones that got kicked out for basically stealing from the Russian people. And I don't know, you might have more to say about that, Faran.
Well, and that was the one thing, as I actually was looking up different statistics last night, and you see where there are way more Ukrainian oligarchs than there are Russian oligarchs, believe it or not. And the reason why is because of the backing of the United States of America, especially with the United States going in there, putting in their own little private businesses or funding a lot of these private corporations. For those that haven't seen Ukraine on Fire, Revealing Ukraine, or Ukraine, 30 Years of Independence, all by Igor
Lopatovnik, yeah.
Yes, I always mess up his last name. I'm so sorry, Igor.
Okay.
But 3 installments with him and Oliver Stone talking about, you know, and it's a great, and I wish every American had to sit in a history class and watch what's been going on, especially then you have the release of Hunter Biden's laptop, knowing that it's true now. But it's this whole history of, you know, the 2008 color revolutions and how we were behind that secretly, going into the Maidan coup that was supposed to be peaceful. And then all of a sudden it turns into violence and people getting sniped in the middle of the street. Then you find out people were actually led to their death. I mean, it's one of these things where Americans, I feel, are so sheltered in the sense, again, with the mainstream media of, look at this racism. Look at how Will Smith just slapped across the face Chris Rock because he talked about his wife. Look at all this. And it's all these distractions, right, to keep you from understanding what's really going on in the world. And I don't blame Americans because, again, I had, for example, this morning on the show, I had my own mother who's in the boomer generation, and their generation lives on Facebook. But I will say this, the tide is starting to turn. When all this started happening, my mom was very Ukraine, because that's what was being fed to them. Now on Facebook realizes that all the kids and everybody under 35 are off Facebook. We hate it. And I can say that as a 35-year-old. I can't even remember the last time I went on Facebook. So if you're trying to reach me there, don't.
I deleted my Facebook and my Instagram because they said they were going to, you know, they were allowing hate speech towards killing Russians, and they said Russian soldiers, but whatever. I deleted both accounts.
But what's interesting, though, is that Facebook at the same time is not going through and really deleting people in support of Russia, because they see that a lot of it, or at least not support of Russia, but they're not deleting the Tucker fans. Right? They're not deleting those right-wing people who my mother watches Tucker religiously. She loves him. And I'm like, Mom, if you like Tucker, then you'll love alternative media. It's just that generation, they don't really know where to find it. If I told her Rockfin, she'd be like, what's Rockfin? You know, now hopefully she's watching and she realizes. But the thing is that Facebook is not deleting those right-wing people like they used to back in 2016, because Facebook, as we say, and, you know, in the younger generation, Facebook is dead to us. So Facebook has to cater to their new demographic. And now with Tucker posts going around on Facebook, my mother being the biggest demographic on Facebook, we had her on this morning and we're like, what are you seeing? And my mind was blown. She goes, you know, I'm really starting to question why we care about Ukraine and why we're not talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and what's going on with this. And again, she's a Republican, but I mean, and they're starting to see the Democratic warmongers and these war hawks. And she's like, you know, I think they're trying to bring us into a war. And people are starting to open up in that boomer generation. Yeah. And I'm like, come this way, come to the light. You're learning. Yes.
Yeah.